And we are back on the Zero Hour. I am Richard RJ Eskow, and there's been a rise of science fiction programs suggesting that we may be confronted by, replaced by, or even rebelled against by robots. But is it possible that the robots are already here? Here to discuss this issue with us is Andrew Aghapour. Andrew is associate editor with ReligionDispatches.org. He edits the Qubit, the subsite The Qubit, which examines the intersection of science, religion, technology, and ethics. Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me here.
Well, you wrote a piece that caught my eye, and it was on the AMC science fiction show, AMC channel science fiction show, Humans, which shows robots living in people's houses, and they're incredibly lifelike. They seem just like people. They are great babysitters. They're great, lovers. They do whatever you want. They're like people, only better. I mean, that could be the slogan, like people, only better. And but you had a slightly different take on this. And there's this kind of trend. Some people have seen Black Mirror on Netflix, which is a British show, which addresses some similar issues. You had a slightly different take on the perceived robot threat. What was that?
I did, yes. I think that the android, the human-like robot, is a valuable literary trope because in fiction it allows us to imagine technology distilled into a human form. But I think that our near future probably won't look like this AMC drama, Humans, because it seems unlikely to me that the future of robotics would limit itself to robots that happen to have the physical form and particular intelligence that we associate with our own human bodies. I think that we often are most likely to imagine technology overtaking us, becoming our usurpers, and somehow looking like us. But that isn't really what the current beginnings of robotic technologies are starting to look like.
Well, you know what? One thing that comes to mind listening to you talk is I was approached once by a member of a cult who said to me, a real cult, who said to me, "We can make you a better you." And I said I was aiming a little higher. And there's something about that the idea that the robot is kind of a better human, but that really maybe that's not what's really developing all around us organically is not the creation of another human, another with two arms, two legs, two eyes, and so on, but really a variety of different devices and software programs and chips that replicate portions of what it means to be human, that somehow our humanity is being outsourced in multiple different directions, and that therefore it's kind of happening without us noticing it. That's kind of what I got as a theme of your piece. Did I get it right?
That's just right, exactly. I think that we as humans, especially we in the West, have a long history of idealizing the human form. We can go all the way back to Genesis, where we have writing that God created humanity in God's image. And that's a foundational set of myths and set of ideas about the human form that carried through well into the Enlightenment and into humanism, which is really centers and privileges the human. But I think that the more time we spend focusing on the human, the easier it is to find ourselves overlooking the vast variety of different forms that are out there. So just as humans have often overlooked that animals have many types of intelligence and are much more clever and interesting than we had once thought, I think right now we're overlooking that a lot of new technology that seems to have not crossed some threshold into being conscious are actually much more clever and perhaps much more likely to influence human life than we had once imagined.
We're talking with Andrew Aghapour, who is associate editor of Religion Dispatches and editor of The Qubit. Yeah, it's a fascinating question because it basically, a number of issues arise around it, one of which is, okay, we have, in addition to this physical form, we have something we perceive as a subjective consciousness. We experience the world in a very subjective way, as serial moments in time, and all of that complex area of study known as consciousness. But maybe it's possible to have our humanity replaced or challenged, not only without an entity that has our physical form, but without an entity that has consciousness as we know it.
Exactly. And I think that it's over the course of the last 100 years in philosophy, we've started to get away from the idea that there is only one kind of consciousness. It's easy to think about our own personal experience and think, well, there's no way that a robot could have that. It's also pretty hard to narrow down what consciousness is exactly. There's also a lot of variation across people and across the animal kingdom. So if we start to become a little bit more open-minded about what counts as consciousness, it's a lot harder to draw a firm line that keeps robots and animals out and keeps humans always on the one side.
Yeah, it's a great point. I think even within individuals, that consciousness is something that's constantly shifting in priority, if not in nature. In other words, when I'm balancing my checkbook, on those rare occasions when I have done so, when I'm balancing my checkbook, I'm a calculator. When I'm driving a car, I am a navigational device. When I am, if I'm writing love poetry, which I think I did right before I last balance my checkbook, but if I'm writing love poetry, then I'm, emoting in a way that may not be replicable by machine at this point. But my point obviously being that even the consciousness of one person is constantly shifting, mutating, adapting. And so maybe you raised an interesting question there, because I think maybe there too we're going about it the wrong way.
I think that's right on. I think that when we think to our own conscious experiences and start to break down these different mental tasks, no single task seems to be so special and so unique that we could never imagine it being accomplished by something that isn't a human. And if we start to think about technology less in terms of androids, some machine that is exactly like us and can accomplish each and every one of those capacities, but instead imagine that there might be a wide range of robotic beings. I use the term theroid. If android is a human form of a robot, theroid would be animal robot. We can imagine that there would be robots that can cluster certain aspects of human cognition quite well. And I think we're already seeing that in current technology.
Well, that raises a whole other interesting set of questions. First of all, I think that's probably true. They have yet to write a program that, whether we go back to Eliza, the psychologist program of many years ago, or I wrote a piece on artificial John Lennon personality, all of those at various points you can kind of suss out, with an informal Turing test that that's really not a person. But certain aspects of what a person does can certainly be synthesized now. One of the things that intrigues me, I wanted to get your thoughts about it, Andrew, after reading your piece. One thing that's bothered me a lot is that there's a school of kind of materialist scientific or engineering thought, I would say, that says, for example, it promotes robot pets. And to me, one of the things that has always bothered me about the robot pet thing is that in order to really, I've heard people say, well, it's no different than having a dog or a cat. Well, to me, it's fundamentally different, because even though it may perform all the functions of a dog or a cat, it may, ask for attention, or it may appear to sleep, or it may jump up on my bed, or it may greet me when I walk in the door. The fact is that what makes most people, I think, enjoy a pet is the awareness that there is a being there with its own subjective experience of reality, and the idea that we can reduce a pet and potentially a human being to a series of functions may be missing the point. In other words, I guess what I'm trying to drive at is that all the functions that you describe in your piece and that we've been talking about now in my opinion, take place without that subjective experience of the universe that we call consciousness. And that's okay. I mean, there may be fragments of consciousness and so on, and that's fine. But that when you start devaluing the experience of being a being, then I think you're kind of getting down the wrong path, at least based on the world as we understand it today. What do you think of that?
I agree fully. I think that I really like the distinction of functions versus being. That sure, we can find robotics that can engage in many of the functions that we might associate with a dog. Maybe a robot that functions to go get your paper, a robot that functions to, like a cat, it might purr when you pet it, or like a dog, it might shake and wag its tail. But that, you can't add up all of the functions and get the being. There's much more to a living thing than the discrete functions, because functions are already filtered through what we see as valuable. There's much more to an animal than their functions, because there's much more to them than what we can observe immediately or find valuable in the moment. I think that's part of what's so great about having a pet, is they're always pushing back.
Right.
You can do your best to train a dog, but you're never going to reduce it to a functional robot, no matter how obedient that dog is.
Right. When I'm in my apartment with a robot, I'm alone. When I'm in my apartment with a pet, I'm not alone. And that's a subjective judgment. I get it, but that's my way of rephrasing what you said. Now, there's an interesting flip side to this, to this whole conversation, Andrew Aghapour, which is I was on a panel a number of years ago with a futurist panel, and one of the other panelists was Jemay Cassio, and we both brought up there had been a video of a robot dog. It was basically a pack robot, but the optimum design for it was 4 legs, and it looked no head, but 4 legs, and it looked very much like a dog or an animal when it trotted. And in the video, the demo video, the people who designed it and built it kicked it really hard to show how it can recover from a blow and stay on its 4 feet. And we had a whole discussion around the fact that we were disturbed by the video of this robot being kicked, even though you could see the engine inside it. It was it was wire mesh, so you could see all the way through it. You knew it wasn't alive. And the conclusion that I drew from that, everybody was saying, well, we shouldn't be disturbed. My conclusion was, despite what I just said about robot pets, yeah, it's okay to be disturbed by that, because we don't want to lose our humanity, and part of our humanity is compassion. So it's just like damaging a doll or something. You know it's a doll, but part of our humanity is treasuring things that seem lifelike. Does that make any sense? I
agree with that, and I think that there's some of the reductionism and cold materialism that you described earlier about people who say that a robot could easily replace a pet. I think that same materialism can cause one to think that it's important and somehow enlightened and significant to turn off emotional responses to beings that we can rationally understand, say, aren't experiencing pain. But I also think that the cold, empirical, rational facts are not the only important things in our lived and experienced world. You know, I think I've seen that video myself before. It's a big dog,
right?
A piece of machinery that's designed to carry gear for soldiers.
Exactly.
And when it gets kicked, there is a part of me that's upset at the person for kicking it. And I'm not going to watch the video over and over and meditate on not feeling that anymore, because that's just an important part of who I am. That's just the empathy of my own being coming out.
Well, that's a beautiful way to put it, and I guess I'll close with this. In your article, where the robots are about humans, where the robots are called synth, you talk about a young woman saying to her boyfriend, "There's nothing I could do that a synth can't do better, or a robot can't do better." And my answer to that is, you can feel, you can experience what it means to be truly human, and to me, that has value. I
think that's wonderful. We're always in a dialectic with the world around us. And hopefully, if robots can do more and more things that we associate with what's human, we can learn about more and more things that we didn't realize were human the entire time.
Well, that's a beautiful way to put it, and I will end there. Andrew Aghapour is an associate editor with Religion Dispatches and editor of The Cuban. Andrew, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.